Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to look at a tragic incident that took place in Sweden in 1998 in the city of Gothenburg. What began as a Halloween party attended mostly by teenagers quickly turned into a disaster. After a small group of teens were denied entry, a moment of anger escalated into an act that would have irreversible consequences. Within minutes, a crowded dance floor became a deadly environment. The tragedy that followed would become the worst in Sweden's modern history. This is the story of the 1998 Gothenburg discotheque fire. October 1998 and Halloween was just around the corner. For many teenagers and young adults, that meant one thing: parties. All across Gothenburg, Sweden's second largest city, young people were looking for somewhere to go, somewhere to gather, dance, and celebrate the night. One of those parties took place on the evening of October 29, 1998, and would later become one of the darkest nights in the country's modern history. The event was held in a cultural building owned by a Macedonian Cultural Association located in Hisingen Island in the Backaplan area of Gothenburg. The building itself was not designed to function as a nightclub. Instead, it was a multi-use community space that could be rented out for meetings, social gatherings, and small private events. That night, however, it was transformed into a youth disco. The party was organized by a group of young people, targeting an audience roughly between the ages of 12 and 25. It was a paid entry event, open to anyone who heard about it and could afford the entrance fee. The organizers promoted the party informally, relying mostly on word of mouth. Flyers were handed out at schools and shared among friends, and news of the event spread quickly through youth social circles and hangout spots across the city. Holding a public disco in Sweden requires permits, inspections, and approval from fire authorities. Capacity limits must be assessed, emergency exits evaluated, fire safety standards met, and trained staff hired to manage crowds. For the organizers, who were young and had limited resources, complying with these requirements would have been expensive and time-consuming. Instead of applying for permits, they chose a different route. When renting the hall, the organizers described the event as a private birthday party, with a stated capacity of around 50 people. By doing so, they avoided fire inspections, capacity checks, and the regulations that would have applied to a public dance event. From the start, the goal was to draw in as many people as possible. Money played a major role. Guests were required to pay at the door, and the more people who entered, the more money the organizers could make. On the night of the event, crowds began gathering outside the building well before the party reached its peak. By the time the evening was fully underway, nearly 400 people had entered the hall, almost 3 times the legal capacity of the space, which was estimated at around 150 people. The crowd was made up mostly of teenagers and young adults, most of them from immigrant backgrounds, representing a wide mix of cultures and communities in Gothenburg. This wasn't an event aimed at any single group. It was simply a popular youth party open to anyone who had heard about it. The party itself took place on the second floor of the building. The main entrance was located at the front, where a stairwell led directly up to the hall. At the back of the room, there was a secondary door that served as an emergency exit. Beyond that, the layout offered few options for escape. Inside the hall, conditions were already far from safe. The decorations had largely been put together by the organizers themselves. Many of the materials used were highly flammable, including wood-based panels, plastic decorations, and temporary fixtures. There were no sprinklers, no professional fire-resistant treatments, and no proper fire safety planning for a crowd of that size. The environment was crowded, poorly ventilated, and completely unprepared for an emergency. By around 9 p.m., the event was in full swing. Hundreds of young people packed into the hall, filling nearly every available inch of space. Movement became difficult. Dancing was limited, and people stood shoulder to shoulder, pressed tightly together. Despite the obvious overcrowding, the party continued. Music played, lights flashed, and for a time, many attendees tried to enjoy the night. At the entrance, tensions began to rise. A group of 4 teenagers who had not been able to enter earlier and refused to pay the entrance fee became involved in an argument with those controlling the door. Voices were raised, tempers flared, and the confrontation ended with the four youth being turned away. Angry and humiliated, they walked off into the night. But they didn't leave the area. They would return with a sinister plan in mind. Just before midnight, the four teenagers returned to the building. This time, they didn't try to argue with the people at the door or force their way inside. Instead, they went to the rear emergency stairwell leading up to the second floor exit just behind the stage, poured a flammable liquid onto a stack of chairs, and set it on fire. The stairwell was a critical escape route, and once it ignited, flames and thick smoke spread rapidly upward. Because the building contained highly flammable materials, the fire grew quickly. Within moments, the stairwell was engulfed in fire and started to spread into the hall. The DJ was the closest to the rear exit and was first to notice smoke drifting into the hall. Some walked toward it out of confusion, trying to see what was happening. When they realized there was a fire, they turned back and began pushing people away from the entrance. At first, many partygoers farther inside the hall didn't understand what was happening. Music was still playing and visibility was poor. But as many people began yelling and pushing, the word fire spread through the crowd and everyone started to panic. With almost 400 people crammed inside, movement became nearly impossible. People were pressed tightly together and instinct took over. Those closest to danger pushed forward, forcing everyone ahead of them to do the same. The emergency exit door luckily opened outward, which technically made escape possible. It has been a recurring theme in incidents like this where victims were unable to leave due to the door opening inwards. The exit itself was small, and the sheer number of people trying to get through it at once created a bottleneck. People tripped, fell, and struggled to stay on their feet. As smoke filled the hall, breathing became difficult and visibility dropped rapidly. The DJ, realizing something was seriously wrong, grabbed his phone and called emergency services. Because of the loud music, shouting, and confusion, the dispatcher initially had trouble understanding what was happening or exactly where the fire was. After several tense moments, the dispatcher finally knew where the emergency was, and firefighters were dispatched immediately. While help was on the way, conditions inside the hall continued to deteriorate. Thick toxic smoke spread across the ceiling and then downward. Many people became disoriented, unable to see exits or recognize where they were. Some lost consciousness before they could reach safety. Some became desperate and drove them towards the windows. Several teenagers smashed the glass and jumped from the second floor, falling roughly 20 feet or about 6 to 7 meters to the ground below. Many survived the jump but suffered serious injuries, including broken bones and head trauma. Faced with suffocation or a dangerous fall, some felt they had no other choice. Sadly, not everyone made it out. Many teenagers collapsed where they stood, overcome by smoke inhalation. Others were caught in the crush of bodies as people tried to escape, trampled during the stampede. Later examinations showed that smoke inhalation was the primary cause of death for most victims. In some areas, bodies were later exposed to flames after people had already lost consciousness, leaving some victims burned beyond recognition as the fire spread through the hall. Firefighters arrived about 4 minutes after the first emergency call. They immediately entered the building, searching for survivors. People were carried out through doors, stairways, and even through the second floor windows. In the chaos, many civilians also rushed into the building, desperately trying to rescue friends and family members who were still inside. While their intentions were understandable, their actions sometimes hampered rescue efforts, making it harder for firefighters to move freely. When firefighters finally reached the main entrance stairwell, they encountered a horrifying sight. The entrance was blocked by a pile of bodies, forcing rescuers to remove them before they could access the hall. Many of the victims who were found there had been among the first to encounter the smoke and flames. Then, there was room 203. Around 20 bodies were discovered inside. In the panic, many teenagers had run into the room believing it might lead to another exit or offer protection from the fire. Instead, it became a trap. With no way out, smoke filled the space and those inside were overcome before help could reach them. Outside, emotions boiled over. Anger and grief turned into confrontation. Some civilians accused emergency services of arriving too slowly, and tensions escalated into verbal and physical clashes, mainly involving police as they tried to secure the scene and control the crowd. By the time the fire was brought under control, 63 people had died, most of them between the ages of 12 and 19. More than 200 others were injured, many with severe and long-lasting injuries. Friends and families gathered outside the burned building, desperately searching for answers and for news about their loved ones. Many were still hoping someone might be alive inside. As the hours passed, grief turned into anger. People questioned why the emergency response had not been faster and demanded to know how a party could end in such devastation. In those early moments, however, even authorities did not yet know what had caused the fire. Police quickly launched a massive investigation. Hundreds of people were interviewed, most of them survivors, witnesses, or individuals who had been near the building that night. The scale of the inquiry made it one of the largest investigations in Sweden at that time. Early on, 2 suspects were taken into custody, but after further questioning, they were released when investigators concluded they were not responsible. As evidence was collected and witness statements were compared, investigators became increasingly convinced that the fire was not an accident. Some witnesses said they recognized the individuals involved, and others reported seeing the teens near the stairwell shortly before smoke began filling the hall. Taken together, these accounts pointed toward deliberate arson. It took more than a year before police were confident enough to make arrests. Eventually, the 4 teenagers were taken into custody. At the time of the fire, there were Muhammad Damini, 19, Shoresh Kaveh, 18, Hussein Arsani, 18, and Meysam Mohammadiyeh, 17. All 4 were of Iranian background and were living in Sweden at the time. During the trial, prosecutors established that Shoresh Kaveh had physically ignited the fire, but that all 4 had agreed to carry it out together, which became the key factor in their convictions. Their lawyers argued that their intention was not to cause harm but to simply aggravate the situation. In their mind, if they can't have fun, then no one should. An act of retaliation to ruin everyone's night. Kaveh was sentenced to 8 years in prison, the maximum sentence allowed under Swedish law at the time for offenders between 18 and 20 years old. Muhammad Damini and Hussein Arsani were initially sentenced to 6 years, but their sentences were later increased to 7 years after an appeal. The youngest of the group, Meysam Mohammadiyeh, was under 18 at the time of the crime and was able to evade justice. Because of his age, he could not be sentenced to prison and instead received 3 years of closed youth care, the harshest penalty available for a minor under Swedish law. Closed youth care is not the same as juvenile detention, but more of a therapy rather than an actual punishment. The difference in sentencing sparked widespread anger and debate, with many feeling the punishments did not reflect the scale of the tragedy. Families of the victims were also outraged that the event organizers faced no serious criminal consequences. Despite clear violations involving overcrowding, lack of permits, and fire safety failures, courts ruled that organizers were not responsible for starting the fire. As a result, they received only fines and administrative penalties, further fueling public frustration. The disaster shocked Sweden. The country had never experienced such a high loss of life from a single fire. The impact fell especially hard on immigrant communities as many of the victims were young people from immigrant families. Decades later, the Gothenburg discotheque fire is still remembered as the deadliest fire in Sweden's modern history. Hey everyone, it's been a little over a year since I started posting in this channel, and it had been an amazing year so far. There had been ups and downs on my channel, but knowing that I have a small loyal following really makes me want to keep going. Subscribers, random followers, or even haters, you guys are the foundation of my channel, and without you guys, my channel would never reach the kind of accomplishment I have on this channel. Thank you so much for all your support, and I wish you all a happy new year.